friends. I'm very glad to see you here at our seminar. It is organized this time by the Center for Arab and Islamic Studies of the Institute of Oriental Studies and the Oriental Faculty of the State Academic University for the Humanities, with a partnership with our Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. And I'm very glad that the main guest today is my dear friend Omar Al-Ubaidy, who is director for Studies and Research, Director for Economics and Energy Studies of the Dirasat Center, who is well-known economist and specialist on the oil issues in the GCC countries and GCC region. Dr. Omar, Dr. Al-Ubaidy, please, your presentation.
Thank you very much, Vasily. I would like to thank Vasily and the Institute of Oriental Studies for the opportunity to present today, it represents the latest link in a long chain of partnership activities between my organization, Bahrain Center for Strategic International Energy Studies, and the Oriental Institute. Very happy to continue that relationship. The presentation today will be around the relationship between Russia and Saudi Arabia in the oil realm. So to start with, there's a lot of conspiracy theories in oil markets, in energy markets. In all things these days, in fact, there's a lot of conspiracy theories in every domain. But energy markets in particular seem to attract a lot of conspiracy theories. So let's look at some facts. The first fact I want to discuss is that historically, when it comes to OPEC, only Saudi Arabia complies with OPEC quotas. Okay, so in theory, the way OPEC works is by restricting the total output of its members. And the way it does that is by assigning each member country a quota, certain number of barrels it's supposed to produce in a time period, and requiring it to adhere to that, to comply with that quota. In the period 1980 to 2009, which is approximately 30 years, the compliance rate on the quotas was 4%. So that means that 96% of the time people were cheating. So in effect, OPEC's not really doing anything. Sometimes they asked Russia to join in, for example, in the late 90s. And when Russia joined in, like every other country, it didn't comply, it was cheating. But as I say, that's unremarkable because everybody was cheating. There's only one country which complies with OPEC quotas historically, and that's Saudi Arabia. And it would maintain a significant excess capacity. It would produce 80 to 90% of its potential production, whereas everybody else would produce more or less as much as they could. But it did this for non-commercial reasons. It did this because it had a geostrategic relationship with the US, was that Saudi Arabia would maintain excess capacity, would produce below its production. And then if there was a supply disruption somewhere, then prices would normally rise very quickly, but Saudi Arabia in those situations would increase its production to prevent any sharp rise in prices. Fact two, Saudi Arabia was not the cause of the 2014 crash. Everybody wanted to blame Saudi Arabia. So this graph shows you several lines. The black line is the oil price. So you can see the oil price was high until around 2014, the middle, then it started to fall and stayed low. So as you can see, Saudi oil production, the green line, is basically constant throughout the whole time. I mean, it goes up and down a little bit, but we're talking about 200,000 barrels up, 300,000 barrels down. And actually, in the 2 years prior to the collapse of oil prices, its actual production was decreasing. You can see the green line is slightly decreasing. Russia, very unremarkable figure. It's just more or less constant, producing as much as it could throughout the period. On the supply side, the reason why, so there's two reasons why oil prices fell in 2014. One is supply, the other is demand. On the supply side, you can see that USA is one of the major reasons. So the US increased its production by around 3 million barrels over the course of 2 years, I should say. And in addition to that, Libya, which had its production disrupted during the Libyan civil war, and also Iraq, which had its production disrupted, all had slow resumptions of oil production. and that's why there was increasing global oil supply. But it definitely is not Russia, and it definitely is not Saudi Arabia. Fact 3. So if there is so first of all, there is oversupply in the oil markets, but Saudi Arabia and Russia are not the cause of the oversupply. Saudi Arabia and Russia have kept their production pretty constant. In fact, they've actually decreased the production, you can see after from the beginning of 2017 because of the OPEC plus. And actually, even setting that aside, Russia and Saudi Arabia together only account for less than 20% of oil production in the world. So the idea of claiming that two countries that account for less than a fifth of the market are somehow causing oversupply is ridiculous. It's mathematically nonsense. But if you insist on claiming the problem is with supply, then it's clearly from the US. Secondly, and this is where we look at the figure on the right, the main problem is not supply, it's demand. Oil demand has fallen by about 20 million barrels. So 20 million barrels, that's equal to approximately, so even if Russia and Saudi Arabia together stopped production completely, it would still not, it would still not balance the market, because there's a 20 million barrel fall in the demand for oil. So clearly the problem is demand side. Insofar as there is a problem supply side, it is not Saudi Arabia and Russia. Fact 4, Russia and Saudi Arabia did not have a price war in 2020. So, here there's another popular claim is that when Minister Alexander Novak came out of the OPEC meeting in March and said, everybody can produce, and Saudi Arabia expressed its disappointment that after this, Saudi Arabia and Russia entered a price war, and it was very negative and adverse and so on. But this is not true. So Russo-Saudi oil strategy is basically technocratic and commercial. So in the past, Saudi Arabia had a geopolitical aspect to its oil strategy, but no longer. That relationship with the US has changed. So Saudi Arabia just wants to sell oil like any other country. And Russia throughout the period has been technocratic and commercial in its oil decisions. Now, there is a geopolitical aspect to Russian oil production, which is that Russian oil is under sanctions for political reasons. But when it comes to choosing how much to produce, that's fundamentally a technocratic and commercial decision. So why is it that oil journalists and journalists in general love to describe Saudi Arabia in negative terms? So there's several reasons for this. First is that Saudi Arabia, I have to say, has a very ineffective public relations strategy. And now it is important for it to have a good PR strategy, but it takes time to become good at public relations. The second reason, as I mentioned, is that conspiracy theories are exciting. So everybody loves to give a conspiracy theory, and Saudi Arabia is not very good at responding to ridiculous conspiracy theories regarding its oil strategy. And the third, which is the reason I put these guys up, is that journalists tend to be left-wing. Maybe not quite as left-wing as Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, but they do tend to be, left-leaning, whether they're in the US, UK, whichever country. So that's just a very quick overview. Thank you for listening. If you want to follow me on any of my articles, you can follow my Twitter on Omar Economics. And with that, I would like to open the floor for Q&A.
There is influence to oil market in Saudi Arabia by this problem with coronavirus.
Saudi Arabia's oil relations, as I say, they've become much more commercially based and not part of the political calculation. So Saudi Arabia's oil mostly is exported to East Asia. So it's, its biggest customers are South Korea, China, Japan, and other countries in East Asia. And the effect of the coronavirus on its exports is primarily through the fact that it has decreased demand, because these economies have all been heavily damaged by the coronavirus. But in terms of the political influence of the coronavirus, it's not, it's been nothing on the oil side, especially after. So there was some tension with the US, because the US was claiming that Saudi Arabia was the reason for the fall in prices, and that this was damaging US shale oil producers. But after there was a G20 meeting, and in the G20 was used to arrange for a coordinated output cut, which included OPEC plus, so OPEC plus Russia and former Soviet states plus G20 members. It's called the OPEC plus plus. And so after that happened, it became clear that, you know, Saudi Arabia is just one country in many countries in international oil markets, and it's not the reason that US shale oil producers are facing problems. And so now, as I say, oil production in Saudi Arabia is just a very commercial enterprise, and it's not affecting its bilateral relationship with these other countries.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one question in our chat. I will read it. As we understand now, in 2020, the fall of oil in oil prices can be explained by the fall of demand. And what about 2014? Was the demand as well, which caused the major fall in oil prices in 21st century? And if today the demand fall can be explained by the corona, what was in 2014? Okay,
so to clarify, the fall in demand now is the biggest reason, but even without the fall in demand, there is still an oversupply problem. But the oversupply problem can be fixed easily. You just have to wait enough time, and then the high-cost producers go bankrupt, and then the situation corrects itself. But the low demand is the big problem. And as I showed you in the figure, we're talking about 20 million barrels. So that's approximately 20% of total oil demand in the world is wiped out. That's because of the corona, and that's the major reason. In 2014, it was primarily supply. So demand was a problem. The Chinese economy was slowing down, but it was mostly supply because the US shale oil had been increasing, as I say, almost 4 million barrels in 2 years. And then also Libya and Iraq, which had significant decreases in oil production, started to increase their oil production. So it was mostly supply in 2014, mostly demand in 2020.
You've already said that now we are suffering from the downturn of demand, but still, is there anything that oil producers can do about this situation? So is there any potential for cooperation in this crisis for Russia and Saudi Arabia?
So first of all, in terms of cooperation between Russia and Saudi Arabia at the moment, I think there's more or less nothing they can do, because together they account for such a less than 20%, and even with the rest of the OPEC and OPEC plus, they still don't account for much. I think OPEC plus is approximately 50% of the market. The problem is that shale oil has high potential and is not something which can be controlled by even the US government. It is actually constitutionally illegal for the US government to try to interfere with shale oil production. And so even if Russia and Saudi Arabia coordinated perfectly, they still wouldn't be able to have a major impact on the market. The G20, cooperation was a step in the right direction. But I think in the long run, actually the best thing that Russia and Saudi Arabia can do.
My question is that the place of the United States in the supply chain of crude oil on the world level, which you mentioned in your presentation, probably will have a big impact on the strategic relations between the kingdom and the United States, which was formerly based on this factor. What do you think will change in future? Will kingdom will follow its special new politics in strategic relations with the United States, or will it try to keep the same as the old one? What will change in this field?
US foreign policy is incredibly dysfunctional at the moment. And the US seems to be at the moment incapable of articulating a strategy towards any country, let alone Saudi Arabia. So I would say that before we get to the specifics of Saudi Arabia's relationship with the US needs to have some greater stability in its and greater coherence in its foreign policy. At the moment, nobody is able. There are big differences between the White House and between Congress and between the Department of Defense and between the State Department.
We work about 1 hour and a half. Thank you so much, Dr. Ubaidy. Thank you for thank you a lot to dear colleagues, dear friends, for your assistance. I hope it is not our last meeting. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day. Have a good evening. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.